let's talk about some tips that you can implement while you're doing your PhD to maximize your job prospects after graduation. Welcome back to That's Academic. My name is Thomson. So this video is actually in response to a very good suggestion which was left under one of my other videos in the comments section. And that was about what PhD students can do to improve their job prospects after they graduate from their PhD. Now, it's a very tough old job market, and unfortunately, just doing your thesis, even if it's a very good thesis, no longer seems to be enough to get a decent academic job at the end of your degree. Now, even if you implement all of the suggestions that I have, you're still not guaranteed to get a job at the end of the PhD, because it is just increasingly tough and competitive to get a good academic job. But I think if you implement some of these suggestions, you might be improving your job prospects. And obviously, things, as always, vary between disciplines, between institutions, and so on. But here are some pointers which I hope might be helpful. So the first tip relates to teaching. Now, if you get the opportunity to do any part-time teaching during your PhD, you should grasp it with both hands. Now, I was very fortunate because the scholarship that I had for my PhD, which was a very generous scholarship given to me by my university, actually had a teaching component built into it. So I actually had that opportunity to do some part-time teaching as part of the PhD experience. Now, what you don't want to do is to think, well, I don't really have time for this, it's another demand in my time, it's a burden. When you're applying for your first academic job, you're going to be asked about teaching. You're going to be asked about either experience that you have or potential you have in terms of teaching. So if you have at least some teaching experience, it doesn't have to be much, it could be some tutoring, it could be 1 or 2 lectures, you're already at an advantage in relation to questions about teaching over other candidates who don't have any teaching experience. Because rather than saying, here is what I would do, you're able to say, here is what I have done. And I think that a job interview panel is just really going to appreciate that, because, you know, some experience is better than no experience. So perhaps speak to your supervisor about whether you can give some tutorials or even 1 or 2 lectures. So you are going to be a specialist on your thesis topic, and you know, why can't you stand in front of a lecture theatre full of students and speak about a topic which is related to your thesis? You're also only going to develop confidence as a teacher and as a speaker by doing it. Look, when I think back to the first lectures that I gave, I don't think I was very good. But you only become good by doing it. It's a bit like driving. I mean, who is actually a good driver when they pass their driving test? You only become a good driver by getting out on the roads once you're qualified and, you know, improving your skills and becoming a better driver. The same applies to teaching, whether you're teaching small groups or standing in front of a big lecture theatre full of students. So you've just got to get out there, you've just got to do it. Approach your supervisor, ask if you can take some classes, and I think, you know, that is going to be some experience on the teaching side, which is one of the main things that hiring committees are looking for, which will allow you to speak about your prior teaching experience and applying that experience to a specific job proposition. So do approach your supervisor, ask politely if you can assist with any teaching, get that experience on your CV. Don't leave that too late, and don't look at it as some kind of burden on your time. It's actually a really good investment. So the second thing I would advise is to get known. Now, this is not about some kind of, you know, kind of backhand networking or anything like that. It's just making yourself known to people in your field. There are a few ways in which you can do that. You can use social media platforms like LinkedIn or even Twitter. I'm not on Twitter and not a fan of it personally, but I'm in LinkedIn, for example, and I think it just, you know, gives you a feel for what's happening in your discipline, and it gives you the opportunity to interact with other people in your field too. Try and make conference presentations. A few papers, maybe one paper a year during your PhD, I think could be sufficient. Obviously, a lot of conferences are now virtual, but that does give you the opportunity to present at conferences in other countries, which in the past might have been difficult to do for financial or time commitment reasons. So try to present a paper at a conference on your thesis, on your subject area. Get your face attached to the name so that when people think of that topic, they think of you alongside other people. And I think when I was doing my PhD, I just underestimated the importance of this, of being known in my field and in my discipline. Everyone has to start somewhere. So this is not about pretending that you have more expertise or experience than you have. People are not going to look at you and say, well, he or she's just starting off. We don't really need to care about this person. People are going to look at you and say, this is someone who is at an early stage of their academic career. They're eager, they're interested, they're motivated. Let's watch this person as a potential rising star in the field. Or let's involve this person in maybe a conference which is coming up or some research collaboration. So do try to reach out to people. Do try to get involved with seminars, conferences, events which might be taking place in your field. So that takes me to a third point, which I think is a good one. And that is maybe try to publish 1 or 2 papers during your time as a PhD student. Obviously, you have to be a little bit careful with copyright and issues like that. But you can kind of take a chapter and perhaps condense it and then put it out as a published paper. Don't obsess over this. I don't think you have to have a super developed research profile before you come out of your PhD. No one's really expecting that. But if you have 1 or 2 papers published in half-decent journals, that's already going to set you apart from a number of other early career academics. So no one, again, is expecting you to be publishing in the top journals when you're a PhD student. No one is expecting you to be competing at the same level as full professors and so on. But it's about showing that you're already a serious player even when you are doing your PhD. I think most PhD students tend not to have published papers. Certainly in my field, probably the minority of PhD graduates already have publications. So in my field, even having 1 published paper in a half-decent journal is setting yourself apart from other candidates who are applying for perhaps a junior lectureship. And again, when you get into the interview for your first academic position and you're asked about research, you're not just expecting the committee to trust your future research potential. You're also able to point to 1 or 2 papers and say, well, this is evidence of me being able to get published in fairly good academic journals in my field, peer-reviewed journals and so on, have a quality control process. I've spoken about that in another video, and that shows that you can successfully pass that peer review process and that your work can be taken seriously. What I would say, though, is don't spend all of your time trying to publish papers, because you still do have to do the thesis itself. More on that in a moment. But I think it's just about saying, here are a couple of papers which I can use to augment and to enhance my application for my first academic job. Take a chapter or 2 and condense it. Often a PhD thesis is more detailed in some ways than some published papers. So perhaps take a little bit of the detail out, stick it out there, get it published. Voila, there you have a published paper. But don't leave it too late to do this, because it can take time. It can take quite a lot of time between submitting a research paper and actually getting it published. So if you simply try to submit a paper for publication 3 or 4 months before you're due to complete your PhD, there's a pretty high chance that that is not going to be published by the time you finish your thesis. So I think you want to be looking to submit a paper maybe midway through your PhD thesis, to build the peer review and publication time into the remaining time that you have before you get into the closing stages of your PhD. Again, this is all about trying to differentiate and distinguish yourself from other high quality PhD candidates, but who don't have these additional enhancements as part of their job application. So a fourth thing that I would do as a PhD student is to try to use that time to mature and to develop yourself and broaden your life experiences and your interests beyond your subject area. Because when you become a full-time academic, you will realize that you will never again be left to your own devices in the way that you were when you were a PhD student. Suddenly everyone wants a piece of your time, okay? Whether it's students, undergraduate students, who want to ask you additional questions, want to chat to you about X, Y, and Z, want you to write reference letters, whether it's your PhD supervisees, who obviously you have to invest time in, whether it's your dean or your line manager, committees, library staff, external engagement, serving as a peer reviewer, and of course doing your own research. To the extent that you have spare time during your PhD, use it. Use it to do something else, to explore other possibilities. You know, listening to podcasts, learning new skills, becoming a better cook in the kitchen, whatever it might be, because I just don't think you will ever have that degree of, let's say, free time or flexibility again in the future. So be strategic. There's nothing wrong with being strategic, and I've been strategic, and there's a lot to be said for that in terms of trying to plan for the future in your career. But look, don't be too strategic, because you've still got to enjoy life, and there's got to be more to your life beyond your academic pursuits and your subject area. So I would say also use this time to develop your life beyond your academic pursuits. And that takes me into the fifth piece of advice that I would give you for enhancing your career prospects beyond the PhD. And that is, notwithstanding everything I've said about doing some teaching, publishing some papers, getting known in the discipline, don't neglect your thesis. Don't forget to do work on the thesis. I've seen a couple of PhD students who've been really talented, really high quality PhD students. They've got their published papers out, they've got their teaching experience, but they were neglecting to actually spend time on the thesis itself. So the problem with that is they are then putting themselves at risk of not completing their thesis on time. The problem with that is if you run substantially over time, let's say you're in a 4-year PhD stipend or a 4-year PhD scholarship, and let's say you take 6 years to complete. Now, you could have genuine extenuating circumstances. It could be the pandemic has impacted you in particular ways. Reasonable hiring committees will definitely be sympathetic to that. It could be family commitments. It could be care commitments. There might be personal circumstances that resulted in delay. That's all absolutely fine. But if the reason why you've taken 6 years rather than, let's say, 4 years is not due to some other set of circumstances, if I was on a hiring committee, I might think to myself, now again, we're talking here about considerable delay, not just slight or marginal delay. I might think to myself, if this person struggled so much to complete their thesis within 4 years, it's a big piece of work, a big chunk of work, don't get me wrong about that, but they did not have all of the additional time pressures and capacity burdens that full-time academics are presented with, then how are they going to cope with those additional pressures and burdens on their time when they're actually hired? It doesn't mean that they cannot do that, and we all become much better in terms of efficiency and time management as our careers develop. But if you're taking 6 or 7 years to do your PhD on a full-time basis, I just don't think that bodes well in terms of the kind of signals it sends off about how this person is managing their time. So sure, do think about getting some published papers out there. Do think about getting some teaching experience under your belt. I genuinely think these assets can set you apart from other talented PhD graduates, but please don't do this at the expense of the thesis. They're supplementary. They're not a substitute for doing the thesis. Because at the end of the day, even if you get that additional teaching experience, even if you get some published papers out there, that means nothing if you haven't actually completed your thesis. So I hope those little pieces of advice are maybe useful when you're thinking about how to manage your time and diversify your commitments during the PhD process. Again, don't be too strategic about this. You do have to be a little bit tactical, but I think what I'm really trying to say to you is, sadly, it's no longer the case, if it ever was the case, that doing your thesis and producing a good thesis is enough to land you your first academic job. It's really becoming cutthroat, the academic job market, and you really have to do more than the thesis to stand out when you are applying for your first academic job. And if you have a published paper or two, if you have existing teaching experience, no one's expecting you to be lecturing on lots of courses or to have hundreds of teaching hours under your belt, but even being a tutor, a teaching assistant, something like that, it gives you something to talk about in the academic interview in terms of existing experience. And also, don't forget to get your face known within the discipline by presenting at conferences, attending conferences, and interacting a bit with other people in the field who are more senior and might be a formal or informal mentor in the future. So just a few tips there. I hope they're useful. Lots more on this to come, of course, in future videos. As always, if you find the channel or the video useful, consider hitting the like button or subscribing to the channel. And if you know anyone else who might find these videos useful, please do let them know. And as ever, engage with these videos by leaving comments beneath the video. Do you have other tips that you think PhD students could be implementing or following when they're doing their PhDs? Or do you have some questions for me that you would like me to address either in the comments or in future videos? I do want this to be helpful to you as early career academics. And if you are approaching your PhD submission, I wish you the very best of luck with that. So thanks a lot for tuning into this episode, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you next time. Bye for now.